Good morning, everybody. It's great to be back at SLS. It's also great to be back in Edinburgh. You can tell from my accent, for those who don't know me, I'm originally from the UK, but I've been over in the States for nearly 40 years now. And probably a little bit of my experience in moving to the States will come through in my presentation today. It's always fun to, once a year, twice a year, many times a year, summarize our vision at Corero, because it obviously changes as we evolve. I've been with Corero 12 years now. It's the longest I've ever worked in one company. And what I've found in reflecting on the last year, from the last year at SLS, is that the main vector of our direction's changed, but we're always fascinated by the changes that Paul highlighted, or the changes that are happening around us in our industry. I mean, the pace of increase in the speed, scale, and uses of the internet still surprises me after all those years. You know, it's something that I was fortunate enough, the internet, to be involved with right at the beginning of its commercialization, and I continue to be very excited about what lies ahead in the internet. But that also gives us obviously an opportunity to do our job, which is, as you were hearing from Carl or from Paul, is to protect that internet and make sure that it's available for the customers, the governments, the researchers, the healthcare workers, etc., that need it to run the world. And so a theme for today's summary of our vision is we're built for the real world, and that's really made a difference to how Corero's progressed over the last decade. So DDoS and service availability, linking back to Carl's introduction, it doesn't really matter these days which industry you go to or which sector you go to, DDoS is a factor. And for me, this is very rewarding. I've worked in lots of companies during my career. I've founded multiple companies, sold companies, and often they were focused on one industry or a segment of an industry, or a part of the supply chain, or even a targeted geography. But working in DDoS today, I don't find an industry that isn't needing DDoS protection or internet access that has DDoS protection built into it. So that's also very rewarding for both myself and the team here at Corero. Each year we publish a threat intelligence report. Copies of it are available here at the conference, and we've started the rollout. I did a webinar last week about the topic, and there's some high-level numbers here that you'll see in the infographics that are consciously prepared for media and communication, but it's easy to miss the impact of these statistics. For example, if I pick the first one, it's saying that 82% of DDoS attacks were under 1 gigabit per second. And for most of us, you think of a gigabit now, that's the kind of speed you expect with your fiber to the home connection. But when you look, from a scientist point of view or from a DDoS practitioner point of view, I mean, 1 gigabit per second, that doesn't sound very big, right? But when you embed that statistic and figure out, hey, that's like 100 4K streaming customers, or that's 1,000 social media users, right? So when a gigabit DDoS attack shows up at your site, it's the equivalent these days of 1,000 active social media users. 1 gigabit delivers 450 gigabytes an hour, and those kind of realizations. So when you see a 10 gigabit attack, you're talking about 10,000, the equivalent of 10,000 social media users showing up at your connection, at your website, at your service. So the statistics hide how impactful some of these attacks are. So when we're dealing with a 100 gigabit attack, you get an idea of what that's presenting as in terms of equivalent users these days. The fact that vectors are changing every 30 to 60 seconds, what that means is, and we're not talking about multi-vector attacks where the vectors all come at once, which is something that's been going on for years. we're seeing attacks where the actual type of vector that's being used to attack you rotates every minute. That means a 10-minute attack takes as much work potentially as 10 attacks. So there's a reason the attackers are doing this. So again, when you look behind the statistic, it's not just, oh, they're changing a lot. It's magnifying or multiplying the amount of work that detection, mitigation, protection systems need to do. So that's what, even though these numbers, great eye candy, there really are significant threats behind these changes and evolutions of the DDoS space. The fact that 3% of attacks are greater than 10 gigabits will come up again later in my talk here. So one of the things that I carry with me is a rule of 10. When I look back at the last 10 years, our SmartWall product has been in the marketplace for 10 years. It's evolved very significantly during that time, both in speed and capability, and you'll hear more details of that during the few days here. But one thing I've summarized, the size of attacks have pretty much gone up 10x in that time. So we used to see a 100 gigabit attack back then and be amazed by it. Now we see multiple attacks more than a terabit per second all the time. We used to see 10 million PPS packets per second attacks then. Now we're seeing more than 10 times that rate. And every decade that you go down in size of attack, you see approximately 10 times more in the number of attacks. So it's very much a mountain. The peak of the mountain or the tip of the iceberg might be a 1 terabit attack or 10 terabit attack, but every time you go down a decade in size, the breadth of number of attacks multiplies by 10 as well. And then we've also seen about a 10x increase in the number of vectors. So it's a much faster, more frequent, more complex situation. And we don't see any end in this progression. So the challenge is not going away or being conquered. And fundamentally, it's following the internet growth. So as long as the internet keeps growing, as long as more systems show up on the internet, as long as these data centers keep getting built, the DDoS problem is going to grow with it. When we look at attack vectors, there's also an evolution in the number of attack techniques. I've listed some of the buzzwords and names on the right-hand side, just as a reference. But whether it comes to protocols, the services that fundamentally make up the internet, whether it be DNS or BGP or other kinds of services, or the bots that keep showing up and evolving. There's exploitation of old vulnerabilities still being used. They've been around for 5 years, 10 years. We know what they are. We just cannot shut them down as an industry and collective. And then there are vulnerabilities of every new service that comes along. It doesn't matter how clever the designers of the new services think they are. The bad guys have got plenty of time to probe, test, overload, stress those new services and find out ways to use them against the internet itself. Another thing that's exploded is DDoS modes. 10 years ago, it would be quite likely that we'd chat to one of our colleagues and saying we worked in DDoS, they might even be tempted to ask, what's that, or where does that show up? Nowadays, it's hard to get away from DDoS, and DOS and DDoS shows up in all sorts of different flavors and forms, not just the bulleted list that we tend to deal with every day in the data centers and networks of our customers, but we've got permanent DDoS where people attack systems with the intention of bricking them or making them permanently unusable by attacking their flash memories, for example, called flashing. We've seen excuse DDoS. Nowadays, if somebody has an embarrassing corporate moment or political event, they blame it on a DDoS, right? Well, there wasn't no evidence of a DDoS, but it's acceptable to blame it on a DDoS. Another one I saw recently, the self-inflicted denial of service. We saw in the last few weeks a situation where a service goes offline, and I believe it was a config error in the domain name advertising, right? And they took themselves offline, accidentally. So there are all these variations. In fact, when a naturally a disaster occurs, like we had a substation fire at Heathrow and the airport went dark, everybody first of all thought it was a DDoS, and they wanted to know it wasn't a cyber attack or a DOS that was causing the problem. So DDoS is top of mind for many of these outages. Statistically, those folks aren't wrong, because you are more likely to lose service these days with a cyber attack like DDoS than a natural disaster like a hurricane, a fire, or a snowstorm, for example. So in terms of detecting DDoS, this is something, obviously we specialize at Corero, We're all about the packets, and we're counting them, we're extracting features from them, we're discriminating between good and bad packets, and we're tracking and learning, which obviously requires us to keep some state. And we're looking at every possible source of data about these packets. We'll mirror them, we'll look at S-flow data, IPFix or flow data, packet samples. We're even exploring the use of shims in operating systems like eBPF to look at the packets. This is our bread and butter. Without looking at the packets, we can't figure out how to do our job. This is going to continue whether we're doing it at 10 gigabits, 100 gigabits, or 400 gigabits. So part of our vision is that we have to keep up with the speed of advance of networking and processing. And the advance is not slowing. I mean, I was reading an article just in the last couple of days on the flight over here about the advances in fiber optics and laser transmission that are being somewhat stimulated by the data center developments and AI, the need to connect at 400 gig, 800 gig, 1.6 terabit, the multiple fibers they're using. I'm really looking forward to finding out more about the hollow fibers now. Apparently they're making hollow optical fibers, and they're bouncing the signal off of a hollow tube like a straw inside, because it goes faster than when it goes through the glass, through the free space inside the fiber. There's going to be no halt or slowdown in the advancement of the connectivity speeds, which of course is just going to feed the challenge of detecting and protecting against DDoS. So DDoS and service availability. In an ideal world, we've got one application needs to talk to another application, or one machine needs to talk to another machine. Yes, Paul?
On that, I wanted to tell you that we are being forced to upgrade our fiber backbone from 100 gig to 500 gig around the country just for the AI hosting.
Yeah. How can I have been in this industry so long and seen so many fantastic advances? And I have. I mean, I was, for a technologist, I was born at a wonderful time to see all of this happen and still be like amazed or, thrilled by what you read in, each week about the advances that are being made. And the AI engine at the moment that's driving this innovation, even before it, makes real money. I mean, it's making a lot of investment value at the moment, but even before it makes real money, it is just causing incredible change in our industry that we have to keep up with from a cybersecurity point of view. So in an ideal world, an app can talk to an app, a machine can talk to machine. Hey, what could go wrong? Well, the ideal world doesn't really look like that. And when I was at school, when I was in first in networking, everybody was talking about the ISO model with layers 1 through 7, all the way from the physical layer to the data link layer, up through the networking layer, all the way up to the application, the presentation and application layer. Yeah, you can't just go direct from smiley face to smiley face. There's something in the middle, and these days that something in the middle is related directly to the internet for almost most of the large-scale communications. So, this wasn't this textbook model. There were a lot of countries around the world really working on this. Being a European, and the Europeans loved the ISO model. They were forcing every company to build to this model. Governments were requiring networks, applications to build to this model. I actually worked with the Open Software Foundation for many years on OSF1, which was a a Unix variant that followed this, DCE, the distributed computing environment, DME, the distributed management environment. It followed all these standard stacks and everything. But you know what? That is the textbook world. And in fact, most modern universities now, they don't teach this model, the layer model strictly, right? This model didn't keep up with technology and was overtaken by progress in the real world. So the real world today looks a lot more like this. We've retained these layer names from that ISO model, but they're not enforced exactly. They're just approximations of where things are happening. And along came IP networking and the internet, and that's what's driven us forward. That's what's made us go 10x or 100x or even 1000x as fast, or more 1000x more complex. So in the real world, we have a layer 1, layer 2 space where we don't really care for a lot of those smiley face interactions how the data's getting from A to B. Is it through the air? Is it through a fiber? Is it through some copper? Is it over a 5G network, a Wi-Fi network, a fiber to the curb? That's all taken care of down below, and it's not usually the subject of DDoS. It might be the subject of a permanent DOS, like dragging an anchor over a subterranean fiber, in one of the European water masses, for political or other reasons, but it's not the DDoS as we know it. There's this L3, L4 space where all of our favorite protocols, favorite if you're a networking guy, like TCP, UDP, where DNS services live, where BGP operates, IPv4, IPv6, where transit peering occurs between providers. Falls in the general L3, L4 space. And then L7 is the handle we give to layers 5, 6, 7, a mishmash. And we'll talk a little bit later about all that's evolving too, with the move to HTTP3 or SSL to TLS, a lot of changes. And also the peer-to-peer or application to application or machine to machine, 95%, according to the stats, of all apps are client-server models still. There's still a lot of users accessing a service. Even when Carl is messaging me, direct messaging me, it's really client-server to a central service, and then that service I'm also connected to, and the message gets back to me. So almost everything out there today is on this client-server kind of model. And we have to keep that in our mind. Also, we operate on, and you'll see this in the next few slides, on the server side of this equation. There's lots of different ways users could be getting to the service: Wi-Fi, 5G, direct connect, a whole variety of new services too. But we tend to operate on the server side of the equation, the L3, L4, and even L7 space down on the bottom right here. So that's the real world. We had the textbook world, we had the way people would have liked it to be or tried to describe it, but change, opportunity, innovation, investment occurred in this kind of world that we see on the chart here. And in terms of DDoS attacks, L3 and L4 DDoS is the dominant problem, still the dominant problem today. It's on the server side, so rarely are individuals DDoSed. Most often services are DDoSed, obviously to take down the access for the individuals out there. So this is where Corero has been most active for the last 10 plus years. And it's where the majority of our customers today get value from our products. It's obviously very important to us, and it's continuing to innovate and advance in terms of speed, sophistication, complexity. So we spend a lot of our time solving this problem for our customers. This focus with our SmartWall 1 product, you'll hear a lot more about that from both Corero and our customers over the next few days. But we still have an incredible laser focus on keeping this product and product family at the leadership of the industry in terms of its automation, its speed, its ease of use, its accuracy, low false positives, all of the things that we wake up every day worrying about in terms of keeping our product competitive. And what also is required of us, and is very much part of our vision, is keeping up with all of the topologies and deployments. Anecdotally, Paul gave a good example of, I had it in my network, and then I needed to put it closer to the customer's network. That's a model that we've used very successfully over recent years, whether it's physically deploying our boxes in distributed locations, whether it's deploying our protection in edge routers with alliance partners like Juniper, whether it's doing detect and redirect to cloud partners like Akamai, whether it's deploying appliances around the globe for a large multinational customer and controlling them all, whether it in our new products, whether it's pushing protections into smart NICs that are being developed by folks like NVIDIA. We continue to innovate and evolve in this space, and you will see that happen. We don't have an 800 gig product to announce today, but you can tell the direction our industry is going in. We'll be there when it's needed. But what also is important is what's happening over here on the layer 7 side. And back to our previous slides, layer 7 is just this general handle for layer 5, layer 6, layer 7, and even beyond layer 7, sometimes called layer 8, or services that exist, abstract services in the application space, which have vulnerabilities. That none of these things are perfect. So what's happened there is that almost all of this traffic is now encrypted. And it's still the minority of service availability issues and attacks. The dominant one is still L3, L4, partly because it's so much easier to initiate and so much cheaper to initiate than an L7 attack. But even though you need L3, L4, there's still a vulnerability there in internet-based services that needs to be addressed, and it would be valuable for us to address. So let's take a little bit more of a look at that space and see what has to happen there, and that'll help you understand from a vision point of view what Corero's doing. So network security, where we feel we've been leaders in the DDoS space for the last decade, is very different from application security, but they must coexist and cooperate in order to ensure overall serviceability. So on the network security side, there's a whole host of familiar terms and protocols that we talk about. They should be no surprise to anybody who's a practitioner in our space, but on the right-hand side are the corresponding names or familiar terms from the application security space. And as you know, cybersecurity is a huge market and technology space. We were looking at some of the recent investment stats for the number of companies operating in the cybersecurity space. It's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of significant companies, many of them focused on one narrow slice or one narrow niche of the problem. There are some leading companies, the top 10 or whatever, that have portfolios or platforms that expand into multiple cybersecurity sectors, but it's still an area that's seeing such significant evolution that there will continue to be new companies for the foreseeable future. So any vision, 3-year, 5-year vision, understands that there'll be new companies entering, there'll be new challenges in cybersecurity, and if you look at a quick pulse on the market, a lot of them will be on this right-hand side of the chart we see here. One of the reasons that's happening is because of HTTP3. So I pulled a few stats just to reassure my gut feeling that HTTP3 adoption is proceeding at pace, and the little chart on the right-hand side, the orange shows about 30% are using HTTP3 now over the big blue band, 50 to 60%. still on HTTP2. And yep, there are still some folks out there using HTTP 1 and 1.1, unencrypted stuff. It's usually dumb IoT stuff that's doing something really simple and just needs to get on the network to change a thermostat or to, switch on a light. It was made, it was sold, it's still sold, it's still out there, and that's why the bottom blue line will continue. I expect that the HTTP3, you might also have heard of this referred to using the QUIC model over UDP, will continue to advance. It's being used by most of the major important services, as you see in the popular sites. The trend is in the direction, but whether it's HTTP2 or HTTP3, the bottom right chart shows that over 90% plus of communications in that L7 space are all encrypted, fully encrypted these days, which means you can't really address threats in that space unless you're prepared to decrypt. And when you need to decrypt, you can't do that in the middle of the network in the ISP space. You have to know where the application is that you're protecting, and typically you have to see all of the traffic. So very different kind of requirements, technical requirements than L3, L4 protection. Partly that's related to why it's harder to generate attacks in that space. So the stack on the left is what's been in use. We don't need to go into the details, but really we're using TCP protocol, we're doing handshakes to set up sessions, we're negotiating encryption, and then we're getting on with the HTTP requests. If ever you've been near a website, the traditional kind of puts and gets and posts in order to cause the communication to happen. And HTTP3, it's carried with it some of the traditional kind of DOS techniques, reflections. There are opportunities to use QUIC as reflectors, floods. One thing that's really tricky here is with the move to HTTP3, encrypted traffic, and the use of the QUIC protocol, we're losing the traditional TCP handshake that accompanies the majority of application communications today. And that's important because TCP handshake was a way that we detect DDoS, right? We use the TCP handshake and the validity of it to try and detect for spoofing or abusive connections or excessive connections or bad reputation sources. With QUIC, that goes away. QUIC is exclusively wedded to the UDP protocol. And so increasingly we're seeing TCP fall by the wayside for those communications, and UDP, which has traditionally been the playground of DDoS, is now being used more for application to application communication. And that means people are opening up UDP ports, right? And opening up UDP traffic flows. So the advance that we're taking with HTTP3 is actually presenting greater problems for cybersecurity enforcement in terms of DDoS. Not only that, the QUIC exchanges are very much more compact. One of the reasons they went to it is the number of backwards and forward handshakes and trade-offs here between the smiley face on the top left and the smiley face on the bottom right. There are far fewer in QUIC, and that's how when you go to Google Maps and you start typing, right, the autocompletes come up even quicker. Those autocompletes are not being done on your phone, they're being done with QUIC interactions all the way back to Google, and it's sending possible completions with low latency round trips using these kind of queries. And so the low latency interactions, typically driven by user interface applications, are what's driving the adoption of QUIC. Quite a lot of those HTTP2 continued users were machine-to-machine interactions, because machines don't care, for the most part, if it takes a few hundred milliseconds to get a response. The response will come and they'll continue with their calculation. Not in the case of the AI stuff that Paul was mentioning, but just in terms of routine machine-to-machine. If your bank transaction completes in 2 minutes or 2 minutes and 50 milliseconds, you don't really care. You care that it's completed successfully after 2 minutes. Here, though, we're talking about user interface speed up so that applications feel more responsive for social media or for phone apps. And there's even faster accelerations using HTTP3 and QUIC, using the zero RTT, where you can load up your requests with the initial opening of the request and using existing shared secrets. And again, that leaves open the possibility of replays and DDoS exploitation. So what these advances in our industry, which are inevitable, you can sort of feel the driving force behind things like HTTP3 in the L7 space. That's what's giving us the insight to add cloud-based layer 4 to layer 7 detection and response to cyber attacks to the Corero portfolio. And we've started our journey there with some specific features that we're adding to our product line that will help continue to ensure service availability, taking into account these kind of emerging threats or growing threats. So we've announced late last year our efforts in the space of the Corero Observability and Resiliency ecosystem, CORE as we call it. It's an addition to our SmartWall 1 family, and it brings to the detection, mitigation, protection, and analytics of the products that our existing customers know, or if you're prospects or follow a company, the products that we made our name on, it adds core for this cloud native capability that's going to help us expand our role in the space here. So in terms of DDoS and service availability, SmartWall 1, our vision is that as we add core, we're going to expand the space on the server side again of how we can help protect the ever-increasing DDoS threat that exists for applications that need to talk to applications. And we're continuing in today's age to see this dominance of the client-server model, or the many users to servers and services, and that the DDoS and availability protections are predominantly deployed in front of those services in the networks or the data centers that host those services. And of course, even in the services themselves. So what that means from a Corero corporate point of view is that we aim to change the way the world thinks about DDoS and service availability, extending our current offerings with more software expansions. We always have used the network. We're going to continue to use the network in even more innovative ways, and the smart devices that connect to it. We're going to continue to include our analysis and our capability to figure out what's really going on. In other words, the real world view rather than the textbook view of cybersecurity and DDoS, to keep us ahead of the bad guys. We don't really mind, the universal word here is we don't really mind what resource or what place we cause the mitigation or protection to happen. Our idea is that we're going to know as much as possible and have the best view of the world of what's going on in the space of DDoS, whatever layer it's happening at, and then we're going to use our intelligent systems to pinpoint where we can provide protections. And very much in terms of, sense and respond, we can continue to focus on automation, which has given us the 6-second response times that Paul mentioned, but also the low human touch capability for detection and protection that's necessary when, remember back to the earliest chart, the vectors are changing every 30 to 60 seconds, right? The attacks are rotating, they're pulsing, they're sweeping. There's just no time for a human to be involved in those initial mitigations and protections. So we've got to continue to drive that side of things forward very rapidly too. So that's the sort of high level vision that's guiding us. Obviously, it's not just myself, me, or just Carl. We've got an army of people, a small army of people behind the scenes who are working on all the technologies that go into those components. Maybe during my talk, I've touched on a couple of things that might have interested you. So we can happy to have a few questions now. But also, one of the advantages of a conference like this is that we have several days to interact both technically and socially, to think, to maybe ask a question and then go away and think about it and come back and see what perspectives we have. From a personal point of view, I've been through many cycles of technology, whether it be some of the first applications of TCP/IP in distributed systems, to the commercial application of the web. I remember walking into the engineering lab in one of my companies and seeing a website, a color website for a company called Compact Computer. For the older members here, they'll remember that day, but for me, that was an aha moment where when I saw that website and the fact that you could order their product online, this would be back in like maybe 1994. That's when I knew the commercial internet was going to take off. It was the money that drove that expansion. Similarly, a few years later, an ironic fact, given where I am in the DDoS space now, is that I was in a room with the founders of NetScout and also the founders of F5, right? And at the time, I think, and I was in another company called Zedio. At the time, I think we had about 20 people in each of our companies, and we were scratching our heads trying to figure out, was it the network monitoring? Because NetScout at the time was the industry leader in ARM probes. Was it the load balancing? Because at the time, all F5 did was this little load balancer. Or we were in the BGP internet-only router. We built a router that only did TCP/IP. People were like, "You crazy? That's only one piece of the networking market." Everybody else was building routers that did SNA, Cisco, DECnet routing. That we built a little router that had BGP and could peer to two other sites. So it was the classic kind of corporate connection router. And we were sitting around a table. Now, 20 plus years on, F5 is huge. The company I had was sold to Lucent and got deployed a lot. The NetScout company evolved and became a DDoS player. F5 has DDoS, NetScout has DDoS, Corero has DDoS. That's how could I have known 25 years ago we'd be, still in the market, innovating at speeds that are many orders of magnitude faster than we were dealing with then. I don't see anything slowing down in that pace. That's what's stunning, I think, in terms of technology here is there's no obvious break in the developments. Paul, you said there's no mathematical limit, right, as to how much inferencing or machine learning terms can be added to these models. Maybe power will slow us down for a bit, but now we have commercial companies calling for more nuclear power plants, right, to power their data centers. So I think we're on the cusp of a new era, but the challenges remain the same, and Corero's dedicated to trying to solve them. So thank you very much for your time and that intro today. I hope that'll serve as a great way to get the discussions going. Any questions, by the way? Sure.
So your threat intelligence, so a lot of it is, it's mic'd and we get pictures. I don't like that, but that's mic'd. A lot of companies use threat intelligence as a marketing spiel.
Yes.
Okay, so if I take down your report that you had the 4 numbers, right? How do you get to those numbers also? So basically, because I'm an ISP, tier point is 1.
Yes.
We'll generalize in that sense, and there's Brazilian ISPs and so forth, and a lot of us will not want to share our data. Even though we anonymize it, we don't want to share that data. So how do you guys get to that number?
Yeah, it's a good question. So as the source of the data for the threat intelligence that we do, so almost all of our customers voluntarily want to receive, obviously, the protection of our systems and want to be reassured that it's always being updated and that our engineering teams are always looking at the latest threats. So we also have operated a system where being an on-premises solution, the data in our system stays, on your premises or in your network. But when you sign up for our SecureWatch services or our SecureWatch support, there is an agreement in the thing there. The summary analysis, so not the details, but just how many attacks and what type of attacks, etc., that were seen across the globe. That information is rolled up into forming these statistics. So there are summaries that are collected of what kind of attacks are taking place, how they're characterized, and what that means for not only the infographic statistic, but as I was pushing behind it, what actually is showing up at your victimized IP? What does it look like? How is it changing? How many times is it rotating? So it's sort of this collective statistical grouping of that data that shows up in our threat report. Now, if you subscribe to one of our specific services like our advanced SecureWatch, we can actually do that on a provider by provider or customer by customer basis for you. But the system itself is capable of doing that. It's fundamental to fighting cyber crime. I can remember back to the early days of the system, just keeping an eye on time here, but when we rolled out the first SmartWall, it really was one of those breakthroughs, certainly for myself in terms of the products that the teams had built. We rolled it out and we could see DDoS happening at a time when, in real time, at a time when people didn't know what DDoS really was. They knew they were being attacked, they knew they might have gone down, but they didn't really know what was happening. And we were just glued to our laptops for weeks, all weekend, classic situation where people are like, where's Ash gone? At home, they're like, where's Dad? He's like, oh, he's on the, he's on the laptop, because it was like an unveiling of what was really happening. We were getting real-time telemetry, and not just packet PCAPs, which is how most people did it back then. We were getting features that we'd extracted from the traffic that allow us to see, visualize with this tool Splunk that we use, sometimes for the first time, how these vectors were evolving. And it wasn't that pretty as it is sometimes now, but to the chart Paul put up, the colors, you could actually experience a DDoS attack happening and visualize it and understand what the attacker was doing. And in a more exciting way, we could see how our defenses were blocking those attacks and where they weren't blocking it. And it was that cycle of improvement that allowed us to asymptote towards very automated operation with very few false positives. We didn't do it textbook. It wasn't like a mathematical proof. It was, continuous experimentation, if you will, on the front line with DDoS detection and analytics of the protection that allowed us to get better and better. And that's what we strive to keep going in our current product family, is expanding the width of the view that we have, and also the analysis of the data coming in so that it makes sense, like a heads-up display of what's happening out there as the attackers and the threats evolve.
Landscape 2 will be, we'll be revisiting this in detail, and the head of our threat intelligence function and our SOC will be actually giving a presentation about actually double-clicking on that.
Along tomorrow. That's right.
So you will have access to her and her team as a factor of just being constituents of this and attending this conference indefinitely. Like, you'll be able to just call her and talk to her, and you'll get full details about how we get to this information. And you'll get to know too, we actually see a lot. GTT is an example, who's here, as you know. We partner on their whole DDoS business. They originate the business, we use our tools, but our team actually does all the technical mitigation for everything on GTT. I know this is probably hard for people to understand. It's hard for me to understand. I think you know that I ran Radware's security business for 10 years, but F5's cloud DDoS solution is Juniper Corero. That's what F5 uses. The Juniper team knows this because they sell big time into the F5, but the cloud DDoS of F5, we do with Juniper in the Juniper solution. That's how powerful it is. So my point on that is many of the cloud driven services are fueled by Corero. As a result, we see a lot, like a lot more than a $30 million business you would think sees, kind of thing, right? But you'll get to hear more about that.
I think as well, points obviously you're making about anonymizing data, summarizing data. That's the whole point.
Yeah.
Now, the data that you give us access to, there is a written contract in there that, firstly, it's definitely anonymized, it's definitely summarized, and therefore the actual traceability back to yourself, based on a global perspective, no, you can't do that.
Right, but to the extent of that, all our companies all have certs,
Of course,
and we're all supposed to collaborate. But how many of us have certs that we never discussed?
of course.
Everybody.
Yeah.
So.
And unfortunately for us, the whole issue of intellectual property and, knowledge and intelligence does sometimes get in the way. Unfortunately for us, that doesn't happen in the darker world. They share everything, and that's one of our challenges.
And we're doing business, it's this problem of sovereignty looms large, and we try to pretend it doesn't exist. But we all know, and listen, we're doing business in the Middle East. None of those countries want to do anything outside of their country, and they'll put the money behind it to make sure everything is inside the country. But they still want intelligence from the outside, right? They don't want to give anything, but they want to take from the outside. So this world will become harder and harder, and there's only one way to gain that data is to have companies like us, like you, that actually can purvey that data for you, because that data will not be free going forward, for sure not.
It's really interesting when you talk about that as well. I mean, I was the International Technical Director at Arbor for 6 years, and they had the fingerprint sharing, which nobody ever shared. So it goes back to, great marketing strategy. Practically, does that work?
We've taken a somewhat different approach with our Corero partnership. We will share whatever we can openly, because our advancements to help train your models and advance your business makes my business protections better at the end. You can argue everything needs to be protected to some extent or another. I don't have any attacks you haven't seen a million times.
Yeah.
There's nothing new and being invented in TierPoint's ecosystem. So if I openly share and our SOCs share data all the time, I think it just makes us both stronger.
Yeah, I think, and we do have a few customers, government, who are air-gapped, because they have to be, but they're probably more exposed as a result of that. That's the sad irony of it, we're secure, we're air-gapped, but we're not, kind of thing.
Can't help them as much.
But that's right. Charlie, one more over there.
There's two things we see it on the trenches. There's a need, because the customers are asking for some sort of cloud protection for things that are actually running inside of the cloud, because there's a new kind of attack that is called credit exhaustion attacks. You run a cloud, you put $1 million worth of credits inside of AWS or whatever, and because of a DDoS slow-paced attack, they ran out of credits before the time frame, and eventually they either pay up or they have to shut down some service. So some actual customers are asking for, can you put a Corero on my cloud? I'll give you some sort of connection with OCI or AWS or whatever is available. But the actually guys are asking, can you put a protector there, a cloud protector that's connected to my on-prem things?
Yeah, it's a good point. It's like we didn't dive in, but it's often called denial of denial of service of your wallet kind of thing. Because some of these attacks, they don't exhaust your bits per second or your packets per second, right? They're intentionally come along to exhaust your dollars at your wallet, and they will just wail away on somebody's service, knowing that Elastic Cloud is spinning up another 100 instances to process all of those bogus requests and quadrupling, 10xing, even 100xing their budget. Or if it's not the budget, the spend that goes up, the credits go down, and then the service goes offline because they have no more credits with the cloud provider. So that there isn't one solution for that. It's a complex space, but that is the scope of our core product, is a cloud native system that can take telemetry and figure out what's going on in those kind of situations to help the customer. And it's another challenge of L7 protection. The industry in general has not yet solved the efficiency advantage in detecting and mitigating L7 attacks. In other words, you can detect them, you can mitigate them, but it'll cost you as much as processing them, right? And what we have to get ahead of for it to be a widely deployed successful business is we've got to detect and protect more economically than just processing those bogus requests. Now, we figured that out in the L3, L4 space, right, a decade ago, and we've been perfecting it. But this is an industry-wide problem. It has not yet been perfected in the L7 space. But we will get there with these more efficient methods. But at the moment, it almost costs you as much to detect and defend against L7 than to just process the bogus requests.
So to drive trial on our new product portfolio and only available to the people that attended this session, I can promise you this is a true statement, we are extending to you the ability to use any one of our core products, which you'll see in the proceedings over the next 2 days, for free through the end of the year. And it's for two reasons. One is we do want to drive trial, and we want to hear from you on how you're thinking about how we're doing those products. And second, we just want to say thank you for coming, right? And we think we're on to, and you're going to hear and see demonstrations of the new portfolio that we're rolling. We think we're on to something very, very powerful and new, really fresh. And I think it will extend, if you're already a Corero DDoS customer, your capabilities beyond compare. But we just wanted to not have a salesy approach or no gotchas or anything along those lines. Should you be interested at any moment, you can go back and you can drive trial on these products and see if you like it or not through the end of the year. And we can talk commercials in the new year, if you're interested and so forth. If not, no harm, no foul. But we'd love to hear your feedback regardless. So that's available to everybody at this table.
We'll communicate something like that formally to everybody.
Yeah.
So there are copies of the Threat Intel report at the back if anybody wants them. This is the summarized kind of market-facing view, so it's we can go much more deeper technical if anybody wants to, but it's a high-level summary of what we've seen over the last year and presentation of a more detailed presentation of the threats we discussed. Thanks very much, folks. Thanks.
All right, that brings us in.